Just doubt is thinking it through as you make your way to God. It is that momentary inner uncertainty that many of us have as we move toward faith, as we move toward the Lord. It's like having someone shared this with me. I get a lot of information after the sermon. I wish I had it before the sermon, but someone come up to me and said, it's kind of like putting your foot in the air ready to take the next step. You may lose your balance momentarily and go back a step, which I'm finding I do that once in a while now. Or you might take a step or two forward, but you are on the climb, and that's what I'm trying to get to. You are climbing the stairway, aren't you? It's not unbelief. I don't believe that stuff. But Jesus says belief is work. That's the other part. Belief is work. Listen to what he says. When the disciples, this is John 6:28, but he says, when the disciples asked Jesus, what must we do to do the works God requires? Jesus answered, the work of God is this. The work of God is this, to believe. To believe in the one He has sent. That is work. That is toil. That is labor for most of us. What does it mean to believe? What is God's definition of faith? What is God's definition of belief? Well, look behind me up here. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Faith is the substance, the essence of things hoped for. I'm hoping for a better place someday. I'm hoping for a better time sometime. It is that essence that I'm looking forward to a better place and a better time. But it's more than that. Belief, faith is more than that. It is the evidence of things unseen. What about that second part? The evidence. The evidence of what I can't see. What about that part? Today I come to preach a lesson, a sermon. I could never tell the difference. But I come to preach and share a message that I should have probably preached 46 years ago. People used to come to me already as believers. That's just the way our nation was. Almost everybody believed in God. That is not the case anymore. I should have been preaching this all along. So I came to share with you, why do I believe there is a God? Why do I believe there's a God? But it's right there in the second part. The evidence. I'm one of those people that needs some evidence. Maybe you don't, and God bless you, and you're probably right, and I'm probably wrong, and you're probably strong, and I'm probably weak, and I should bow down before you, but I think that's carrying it too far. But listen to me. There's evidence for some of us who, like Thomas, have our doubts once in a while. Will you give us that much? Some of us have some doubts once in a while. Is there evidence out there? And I'm here to say to you, yes, lots of it. Lots of it. Now let me state to you what's obvious. I am not a scientist. So I have to rely on those who are scientists as I research it. I got to rely on them. What do they say? People like Newton. Yeah, that one. Hubble. Einstein. People like that. The revered scientists of even today as well as yesterday. One of them, not so well known, Fred Burnham, a physicist, he says, the God hypothesis. Don't you like the way that starts? Now, I know this is going to sound more like a lesson than a motivational message today, but to me it's very motivational. But I asked you a couple of weeks ago, can we think? Can we stop feeling for 5 minutes and just think it through? But this Fred Burnham, a physicist, he says the God hypothesis is now a more persuasive and respectable hypothesis than at any time in the last 100 years. That's what he says after studying the evidence. I want you to come to that same conclusion today. Dr. Stephen Meyer, PhD in the philosophy of science of Cambridge University, he speaks at length about the 4 great discoveries of modern science that prove God exists. Let me read that again. It is amazing material, and I'm going to rely on him and others, but listen. The 4 great discoveries of modern science that prove God exists. Do I have your attention? Get your pencils ready. I'm going to list them for you. It'll probably take a couple of Sundays, well, this Sunday and next, and a couple of Sunday nights. But I'm going to list them for you. But before I do, let me read 2 verses of Scripture. It's always right there in the Bible, isn't it? 2 verses of Scripture that I always come back to when I start thinking about the evidence of God, and we're going to be dealing with it tonight as well. But even if you can't make the evenings, and I hope you can at 6, you'll get most of it here. But Psalm 19, verse 1, the heavens declare the glory of God. Do you believe that? The heavens declare the glory of God. Look to the heavens if you want to see the evidence. That's what the psalmist says. The heaven declares the glory of God, and the skies of the firmament showeth or proclaimeth the work of His hands, His handiwork. You will see His handiwork in the skies. You will see the heavens declare God's glory. The evidence is right there. The other verse that I think we need to commit to memory is Psalm 139, verse 14. I will praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. We won't get to this morning, but as you look to the skies, there's a moment in which you need to look at yourself and how wondrously made you are. You're sitting there already, aren't you? You're just sitting there not even thinking about it, are you? Your heart beating and your blood pressure and your breathing and you're thinking. At least I hope you're thinking. You're thinking. You're digesting food, some of you. Some of you just digesting coffee. All that, you are wonderfully designed. The evidence of what you cannot see. Now, are you ready for the 4 great discoveries of modern science that prove God exists? Let me give you the first one. Recent discovery number 1 in science is the universe had a beginning. You hear a lot about the Big Bang, don't you? That proves our point. It had a beginning, and that changed everything. Let me explain what I've researched for weeks. Sir Isaac Newton. You've heard of him. Of the 18th century, he writes that the fine-tuning of this universe would have been a very difficult thing to do without intelligent design. He goes on to say, and listen to this, though bodies, talking about the heavens declaring the glory of God, though bodies may remain in their orbits by mere laws of gravity, they could by no means have first derived the regular position of the orbits themselves from these laws of gravity. They could not have gotten there by gravity. Thus, and he finishes, the most beautiful system of the sun, the planets, could only proceed, the comets, from the counsel and dominion of some intelligent and powerful being. That was the conclusion Isaac Newton, studied gravity. He came to that conclusion. And so will we. Newton, other scientists that I've studied, Keebler, Boyle, Galileo, Copernicus, they all believe the universe was designed and built by what they called a rational intellect. It is science, a rational intellect. They all believe that. So how do we get from the founders of these men, these founders of what has become known as modern science? They're the ones who developed it. It was an explosion of science. The founders of modern science, Newton and Galileo and Copernicus. How do we get from the founders of what has become known as modern science to atheists like Richard Dawkins today, the God delusion? Christopher Hitchens, God is not great, and Sam Harris, the end of faith, he writes. How do we get from those relatively modern scientists to the atheists today? Well, it's a rather quick progression over the last 150 years. It began with Pierre Simon Laplace, who decided he would try to do what Newton said could not be done. What did Newton say could not be done? You have to have an intelligent designer. The universe could be here no other way. So he decided to set out to prove there could be another way. So he tried to explain for a while how the universe could just come to be. You see, there was a beginning. You've got to explain now how it came to be. Pierre tried concerning the universe itself. Then a man named Charles Lyell, he set out to explain all of the great geological features of the earth, how you could have canyons and mountains, and he wrote on that and spent his life as a geologist trying to say that could happen without God. And then following that up was Charles Darwin, who theorized the origin of species from simpler pre-existing species. So you have the universe and the features and the species somehow coming to life and then being developed. There it is. That's what they tell you today. The naturalists, the materialists. And those men led to men like atheists like Dawkins and Hitchens and Harris and the naturalistic worldview. What is the naturalistic worldview? There are 4 worldviews in the world. This is one of them. There's naturalism and pantheism and deism and theism. These guys were naturalists. Here's what they believed. The particles of the universe have always existed. That's what they believed. All these particles became living stuff somehow. They believe that. That's faith. They have that kind of faith. They believe that this living stuff evolved and became aware, and they believe that this living stuff eventually conceived or made up the concept of gods. So God really came out of you. Materialism. Naturalism. And they could just go on their merry way believing all those things up until science proved that it had a beginning. And the particles of the universe have not always been there. It is not eternal. You see, the difficult question has always been, where did matter come from? Where did all these particles, all of these gases, all of these things come from? That didn't bother the scientists in the 19th century. They just assumed and preached the world was infinite. But new science, new discoveries say it's not. Matter is not eternal. What happened? What changed? Something very simple, really. The advent of the telescope. The powerful domed telescope. Especially the one in California on Mount Wilson, the Palomar Observatory that Edwin Hubble in the early 1900s peeked through that telescope and began to look at the galaxies. Always before, it was thought that our galaxy, the Milky Way, was the only galaxy. The only collection of stars out there. He discovered many more galaxies and many more stars. We have some pictures. Let me put some of those pictures up there from those powerful telescopes. And Hubble in the early 1900s began to discover all these galaxies. Thousands of them. Thousands upon thousands. It seemed infinite. But that's not even the good part. That's not even all the evidence we have. He discovered, after a period of time, he discovered light from the stars of these galaxies were somehow changing colors. Now, in an infinite universe, you would expect the stars to remain in the same color, the white of a star. It would just stay there. It's permanent. It's there. It's eternal. That's what he'd always thought. But he began to observe, after a period of time, they were changing colors from white to yellow to red. It all has to do with the magnetic fields and the Doppler effect. You've heard of the Doppler effect, haven't you? Where if a train goes by, it's loud, and then as it goes down the track, it gets fainter and fainter until you can't hear it anymore. The train is still just as loud as it was. But the Doppler effect is saying, and this is simplistic, I know, but the Doppler effect is saying it's not making noise. Same thing with these stars. From white and yellow to red. What did that mean? Well, to Edwin Hubble, as I read, it meant proof, empirical proof. Material proof that the universe was expanding. As those stars got further away, they changed colors and red. And he theorized that someday they'll be gone. The universe is expanding. Now that turned everything on its ear, because if the universe is expanding and that's how time is going by, then science says you have to be able to reverse that process And it all has to come back together. It had to start from somewhere to a simple point in time. At the same time, about the same time that you have Hubble figuring this out, you have Albert Einstein working on his theory of relativity, how planets and stars, it all relates in outer space. He was working on his theory of relativity. You know that. You've heard that phrase, I imagine. He came to the same conclusion. He theorized. His was more theory. It was in the realm of mathematics. He deduced it all mathematically as he observed the glory of God in the skies. It's all there. The thing was, he didn't like the result of his findings. Did you know that? I did not know that. He did not like the result of his findings. He did not want the universe to have a beginning because he was a materialist. He was a naturalist. It had to be eternal. And it wasn't. And he didn't like the result of that. So he just literally fudged the results for a while, adding a component to his math that he called the cosmological constant. He just made it up. And it had to do with gravity, because at some point, if it's going this way, gravity has to pull it back. So he just added that constant to keep it the same forever. He kind of held on to that for a while. But Edwin Hubble, that is the guy that the same guy that the satellite is named after, that you've heard. Edwin Hubble, he says, "Come look, take a peek through my telescope, Albert." He did in 1931. He did. You've got pictures of him in the press standing there. He emerged saying in his German accent, "I see the necessity of a beginning." He would later say it was the greatest mistake of his scientific career. So if the universe had a beginning, something or someone had to cause it. I'm betting on someone. And I'm just beginning to share the evidence. We also know from science, basically fossil records, that when life emerged, it showed up, and we'll get into this either tonight or next week, but when life began to emerge in the universe, in the world, it showed up in short, distinct time frames. Should we call them days? On the first day, and the second day, and the third day, and the fourth day, can we use that for evidence? All we know is they showed up in short time frames as life began to emerge. We also know that the cosmic laws that power the universe have been balanced to the extreme. You would almost have to have hundreds, thousands, infinite dials and dial a little bit here to tweak this star over here, dial a little bit here to bring this planet over here, dial this over here to bring this to be. I can't wait to share some of that. Just meet me here tonight. I read from Floyd Hamilton this week, a PhD and a scientist. Consider the earth on which we live. It is tilted at an angle of 23 degrees. If this were not so, the water vapor from the oceans would go to both the north and south poles, condense, and pile up mountains of ice. If the sun gave off half as much light and heat, we would all freeze. Well, if it gave off twice as much heat, we'd all be burned alive. If the moon were only 50,000 miles away, the tides would sweep over the highest mountains on earth. If the earth rotated on its axis at only 100 miles an hour instead of 1,000 miles an hour, we'd all freeze during the night and turn and burn up during the days. If the crust of the earth were only 10 feet thicker, you would have no oxygen to breathe. It's a struggle now for oxygen. It's so well designed. If the ocean were a few feet deeper, all the carbon dioxide and oxygen would be absorbed, and vegetation, plant life could not exist. On and on it goes. Micro adjusted. Every facet of it. The scientists today, now they're coming up with new theories. Many universes. That's one of them. There's just a lot of universes before this one. That just pushes the whole problem back a generation or two is all that does. It still had to have a beginning. Others are getting into with that little tiny particle that blew up. They still want to hold on to that. That it really wasn't matter, it was just waves and particles. Heard of string theory, things like that. That's all it was. But it's not even a theory. They can't prove any of that. It's just made up. Consider the earth, the universe. Without getting ahead of myself, it had a beginning. It's science. It's science. I'll share tonight a quote that says something to this effect. I'm paraphrasing, but it's kind of discouraging when you've worked your whole life and you've developed all these theories and you finally get back to the creation of the universe or how this universe came to be, and you worked so hard your whole life to finally climb over the top of the horizon, only to find a whole bunch of Christians sitting there saying, "Hey, welcome home, welcome back to us." Someone, we've got to figure out who in the next week or so, someone made this. It's science. And get this. He's good. Now I'm getting ahead of myself, but he's good, isn't he? He knows you. How many hairs are on your head? He knows all your faults. sins. He feels responsible for you. He loves you. He gave you life. He says, come to me, and I'll give you a lot more than this universe. That's what he says. I did this in 6 days. I've been working 2,000 years on your next home. Anybody here want to live forever in the next home? Faith. The evidence, things unseen. And that essence of hoping for something more, that's built into you too. Where did that come from? Animals don't have that. Just another evidence. God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Even if you don't have a Bible, you can come to faith, because you see what He did. You have this moment to make right with God. To come forward, and like this young man did today, Gary Rice, I want to be right with God before I go on into eternity.